Chapter 4, Kitchen Cop. The biggest prison in the United States required a huge kitchen capable of turning out 6,000 hot meals a day, plus at least 3,000 sack lunches. It was about as massive as an airplane hangar, with loading docks for shipping and receiving, dry and cold storage lockers, a butcher shop, bakery prep rooms, industrial stoves, ovens and fry stations, and a giant scullery, all of which were partitioned by cinder block walls with lockable steel lockers. It was poorly designed for a prison facility, modeled on large institutional kitchens where food was the priority instead of security. There were poor sightlines and long hallways with too many corners, and the guard station was stuck in an isolated corner. Over 200 inmates worked in the kitchen, and nearly all belonged to gangs. Each of the gangs had a specialty area. The Crips chopped vegetables, the MA made sandwiches, the Aryan Brotherhoods and the Nazi lowriders watched pots and pans, and nobody got in anyone's faces because they were kept apart. It was the only place at Corcoran where the integration rule was ignored. For a prison inmate, a job in the kitchen was the next best thing to a millionaire cellmate. It meant eating better than anyone else, including the staff, and the other inmates all befriended them in hopes of sharing smuggled goodies. The most desirable goods were sugar, bread, and any kind of spoiled fruit that could ferment into excretable wine, the makings of Ceres prunum. Because the kitchen served all 3 yards, it was outside the fencing, although still in the walls, which for the inmates brought a small taste of freedom going to and from work. Supervising these 200 prisoners were 7 scared civilian food service professionals and 4 correctional officers led by Sergeant Charlie Martinez and Officer Joe Reynoso. Martinez was a stocky, barrel-chested, hard-ass veteran who scared other guards as much as the inmates. Reynoso was an eager up-and-comer who couldn't get enough of the job. He signed up for any and all extra training offered and volunteered for the Search Squad, Special Emergency Response Team, the prison equivalent of SWAT. Martinez ran the place as he saw fit. Segregating the gangs was his idea, which he described to prison administrators as making sure his workers were compatible. Since the kitchen was outside the yards, they were a long way from backup, and Martinez figured if the honchos didn't like it, they could suck on their pencils. I showed up for work on the first day in the kitchen, as I had when I started on A yard, wearing my best Class B uniform, spit shined and polished from my boots to my badge. "We don't dress up around here," said the gruff sergeant. "This is the kitchen. It's messy. Shit gets spilled on you. You see me all dressed up?" Martinez was wearing the one-piece green CDC jumpsuit that sold for $100 at Corcoran's uniform store. I had never seen anyone wearing one on duty before. "No, Sergeant," I said meekly. "You see anyone else around here all dressed up?" I looked around. The only other officer in sight was Reynoso, who was wearing a jumpsuit too. "No, Sergeant." "Then get with the program starting tomorrow, you hear me?" I was so rattled I almost saluted. "Yes, Sergeant." Reynoso stifled a laugh. A lean and wiry man, Reynoso was used to dealing with men much bigger than himself, but he'd never seen one so plainly embarrassed before. He liked me from the start because of it. "Joe," said Martinez, "why don't you show this kid what he's supposed to do? Make sure he doesn't fuck up too bad." Reynoso got up and offered his hand. "Welcome to the kitchen," he said to me as I grasped his hand gratefully. "We run a pretty tight ship here." As the two of us toured the mammoth kitchen, Reynoso told me their secret for running the ship. "We get the biggest, meanest, most badass son of a bitch we can find in each clique, and we make him lead man for that area. Clean up, vegetables, whatever. It's his job to control his people. If there's any trouble, he's gone." Prison jobs paid between 10 and 90 cents an hour and were deposited directly into an inmate's prison account, the only money most of them had. Lead men got top wages. At each step on the tour, I was duly impressed by the size and intimidating persona of the area's chief gangster. I was troubled by Martinez's confidence in the prisoners. Kitchen workers handled some of the most dangerous tools, from knives and cleavers to frying pans and steam guns. 4 guards armed with plastic batons wouldn't stand much of a chance if the inmates ever wanted to take over. The Corcoran kitchen was my first big lesson in the necessary interdependence, the crew partnership of prisoners and their guards. The place couldn't function without cooperation, and that wouldn't happen without mutual respect from The place couldn't function without cooperation, and that wouldn't happen without mutual respect for the other side's leaders and rules. If a lead man chose to fire someone on his crew, that was his decision, and Martinez didn't question it. Men with fresh bruises sometimes stopped by at his office to tell him they'd lost their jobs. As long as the work got done and no one got sent to the hospital, he didn't interfere in gang business. At the end of the tour, Reynoso and I reached the rear loading dock where my job waited. The meals prepared in the kitchen were eaten in dining halls located in each of the 3 yards. They were ferried there by transport officers in a box truck holding 9 large food carts with at least 100 meals in each. The overnight shift got breakfast and bagged lunches out to the yards. I would be making 3 trips to deliver dinner. There were inmate crews at both ends to help load and unload the carts, but it was my responsibility to make sure nothing was lost or spilled or more likely stolen. Reynoso waved forward, a gigantic man with peckerwood tattooed boldly on Reynoso waved forward, a gigantic man with peckerwood tattooed boldly on both. Reynoso waved forward, a gigantic man with peckerwood tattooed boldly on both enormous arms. "This is inmate Childress. He's your lead man. This is Officer Vodka. The new transport officer." We didn't shake hands because guards and prisoners never shook hands. Rather, we acknowledged one another with infinitesimal head nods and locked eyes for the briefest of moments, myself trying hard to look nonchalant. Holy shit, I thought, he's bigger than Arnold Schwarzenegger. Despite the prison distance, we came to know each other well. He was imperturbable, soft-spoken, and called the shots for all the white gangsters on Sea Yard. The other 5 men in the back dock crew were all white supremacists who promptly did whatever Childress told them to do. They expertly loaded the truck while Reynoso and I climbed in the cab. Before we were halfway through the first day's deliveries, the rookie and the veteran found they had much in common. We had both been high school star athletes, I in basketball, Reynoso in baseball. We both went on to play junior college ball, where we realized we weren't good enough to go pro. We both had dreamed of becoming policemen since we were boys and joined the Department of Corrections because it paid better and had openings. Neither one of us regretted the decision. By the time we finished unloading that Sea Yard, while the inmate crew stacked dirty breakfast trays in the truck, Reynoso turned to ask me, "Do I have to call you Vodka or can I call you by your first name?" It was the first time a senior officer had asked me that. Within 2 weeks, we were organizing the Corcoran prison staff softball team and entering local tournaments. Reynoso was the spark plug shortstop, and I was the burly cleanup hitter. The team we led stomped everyone in town. Playing ball was fun and addicting, so we started making road trips around the Central Valley to play against fire stations, police departments, and company teams, basically anyone we could line up. An easy friendship grew out of the game. In the kitchen though, I still got the rookie treatment. Whenever some thankless task needed doing, it fell automatically to Fish Vodka, assigned invariably with chuckles and grins from Charlie and Joe. The most tiresome errand was the lunch run. Prison staff didn't share kitchen food, which was for prisoners only. So I was dispatched daily to the staff cafeteria in the administration building at the opposite end of the prison. Charlie and Joe gave me their orders and meal tickets as I trudged off to fill them, frequently paying from my pocket when the tickets didn't cover their appetites. In the usual way of male hazing rituals, the hazers pushed until I stood my ground. After several weeks of fetching burritos and cheeseburgers, I finally declared, "I'm tired of getting lunch all the time. It's someone else's turn." Charlie sat back in his chair with a shocked expression. "Oh ho," he explained dramatically. "He's tired of getting lunch." For a long, nervous moment, I worried that I should have kept my mouth shut. Then Joe stood up with an equally dramatic sigh. "Damn," he said, "I guess I can go today." It wasn't long after that I started getting invited to watch weekend pay-per-view fights at the Martinez home in Visalia, where I met Charlie's wife and kids. It was then when I started to feel like I truly belonged. Like most law enforcement subcultures, correctional officers are insular, traditional, and often related. Charlie's father-in-law was a 20-year man, Joe's wife a probation officer, My first connection to this professional family came during those fight nights, barbecues, and marked the difference between having a job and a career. It also saved my rookie ass when I screwed up. Once I pushed the wrong button on the tailgate lift and dumped 300 dinners on the B-yard sidewalk. Charlie was so furious, he had made Joe leave the office while he ripped me a new one, but he didn't fire me. He even defended me with the civilian kitchen manager, Mr. Hart. I had zero tolerance for disrespect, bracing inmates before the second syllable of "fuck you" was out of their mouths. They rarely swore or raised their voices when talking to a prisoner and always addressed them formally as Inmate Smith or Inmate Ruiz. It was the same exaggerated courtesy that street cops used with citizens, and it had the same effect, calming some and irritating others. The ones who got irritated generally didn't last long in the kitchen, but it wasn't the correctional officers who got rid of them. It was their leader who observed that same etiquette. Respect was the currency of prison life, and anyone who refused to pay it properly had a hard time getting along, whether they were blue or green. Martinez and Reynoso watched me as closely as I watched them. The correctional family was suspicious and selective about accepting new lifetime members. The judgment of senior officers was crucial in winning promotions or good assignments. The standard they used was how the wannabes handled their prisoners. They looked for people who understood the difference between displaying authority and demeaning an inmate, someone who demanded order and control and frankly wasn't a born asshole. The informal vetting still worked reasonably well into the early 80s. The California prison system still enjoyed a nationwide reputation for innovation and rehabilitation that carried over from the glory days of the 1950s and 1960s, when the state was riding high and its institutions benefited. But those days were long gone by 1988. The prisoners especially were headed for disaster, and the largest of them all would be in the forefront. America's approach to crime and punishment was changing radically, and Corcoran was soon to become the poster prison for everything that could go fatally wrong. I completed my probation by the end of 1988 and was scouting for a way to advance my new career. Like many of the young guards at Corcoran, I looked across the interior wall dividing the yards from the total control facility that was scheduled to open in early 1989. Formerly called the Security Housing Unit, SHU, it represented the most significant development in prison management and architecture in decades, and ambitious correctional officers all wanted to be part of it. 2/3 of the 1,200-person Corcoran staff put in for the assignment there. Only 100 of them would be needed. Charlie Martinez thought he was doing me a favor when he asked if I wanted to run the third watch shift in the SHU kitchen. I told him it would be an honor to open the SHU kitchen. I remember Captain Richard Giles, the SHU captain, refused to consider another assignment for me, despite repeated requests. Wistfully, I had been watching the ISU squad. Their uniform was an elite-looking midnight black, different from a line officer who wore a green jumpsuit. They had full access to the prison grounds, the authority to go anywhere they needed to go to enforce the law inside the prison walls. This was what I wanted to do.